I'm Beth and I am an education recruitment consultant with ANZUK Education, here today to talk to you about job applications. So this is the time of year where a lot of schools will start putting roles up on things like Recruitment Online, on their websites. So we want to offer you some quick fire tips to help you along your way if you are interested in applying for jobs. So we're going to introduce you to some tips about your CV writing, producing your key selection criteria, and also taking on your interview so that you've got some great starting points to help you get the job that you're looking for. So next up in our series about job applications, we come to advice for key selection criteria writing. So this is a substantial part of the application process and it can feel a little bit daunting. So we're just going to break down a few tips to help you to get started. What you'll find on Recruitment Online, whether you're applying for a primary or a secondary role, you'll come across the same sort of key selection criteria for each job that you apply for, and that is for equity purposes. So that enables you to actually produce a document that you can use for most of the jobs that you apply for, but you're just making little edits as you go. So what you'll tend to find is that you'll have 5 key selection criteria to reply to, and they will enable you to talk about different areas of your sort of teaching and learning when it comes to your job. So first of all, you'll be looking at things like sort of how students learn and understanding how a classroom needs to be structured. You'll look at things like assessing student data and using that for assessment. You'll look at sort of collegial relationships and liaising with families and community involvement, and you'll also look at classroom and behaviour management. So those will be generally key things that you'll address. So let's jump into some tips. So the first tip when it comes to creating your key selection criteria responses is to really try and target individual schools that you're applying to. So once you've come up with some general responses that address each of the 5 key selection criteria, see if there are any particular examples you could swap in and out of a particular section so that you can apply directly to the school in a sense. So that's not recreating the entire document each time you want to apply, but perhaps you've got one point where you just make some adjustments. So for example, talking about how you might contribute to the whole school community or with extracurricular aspects. There might be some research that goes into figuring out what that particular school values, and then you can think about some examples that are relevant to you to use to substitute for that response. So as you're producing your key selection criteria, you may pause to think about what actually is relevant to be putting into your responses. So not all of your responses need to be built up of direct classroom experience. You might have examples that you'll take from, for example, placement experience if you were a graduate teacher, or you might do a lot of sort of coaching or sort of extracurricular teaching outside of the direct school context. Those are great examples that are still going to be able to satisfy a lot of the criteria in the response. So it's great to put those things in as well. You probably want to aim for a balance of about 80% direct classroom examples versus 20% that are more extracurricular or a little bit more unique to yourself. One thing to consider on top of that as well when it comes to relevancy is if you've been teaching for a long time and you're applying for a new role, try to keep your examples within the last 5 years of your experience, because those will be most directly relevant and will acknowledge more up-to-date sort of initiatives and programs. So one thing that can feel quite daunting about producing your key selection criteria is the substantial size of the document. So you might be questioning how long is too long for each criteria response. So what you should be aiming for is no longer than 1 page per criterion, so about 5 pages altogether for the entire document. Within each criteria point, you probably want to come up with 2 or 3 different examples that address different aspects of the criterion. So you're not just sticking to what one part of the criteria might be talking about. It also enables you to pull from different areas of experience. Maybe if you're a secondary teacher, you could talk about one of your teaching subjects and then another. If you've had experience as a primary teacher doing different year levels, it enables you to draw in different parts of your experience prior so that you can really have a multifaceted approach to each response point. So if you do feel like you need a little bit more of a structured guide with your writing for each of your criterion responses, consider the STAR or the STARE method. So that sort of breaks down each example into a bit of a writing structure for yourself. So S stands for situation. So that's where you just sort of set the scene and talk about the topic or the context of the criteria point you're talking about. You then want to describe the actual task. So what was carried out sort of throughout the example that you were using, for what purpose, for example. A is for action. So given the situation and the task at hand, what actions did you put in place, and the result. So the impact of your involvement when you're exploring the example. The E at the end is a bit of a bonus, so you might want to use an extension point. So that's a really great thing to use to help sort of show a bit of a growth mindset. So beyond this isolated experience you've already had, what are some things you might want to do differently next time? What are some areas that you're now investigating when it comes to your professional development, to show that even though you might have been successful in that example, there are still things that you're wanting to do to improve even more. And finally, when it comes to writing your key selection criteria, it's just important to reflect on your own personality, your teaching philosophy, your experience is up to date, but don't feel as though you have to know everything up to this point to be successful in the job. It's more so about how you frame your inexperience. So really try to approach those sorts of points with positive language about what opportunities you'd like to take on in order to learn and to grow your practice, rather than dwelling on mistakes you've made or things that you don't do particularly well, or things that you don't know. Those are things that are going to be more appealing to schools because they'll be able to see that you've got that willingness to adapt to their context and grow with them as a community. So best of luck when you're writing your key selection criteria responses.